Hey crew, it's Pitt, and I'm back with some more exploration. Today we will be diving back into the Chronicon from Archaix. We will be reading aloud and discussing as we go along the various points that are brought to light by the text. It is not the format for everyone, but people will find value in it, so you are more than welcome to tag along as we continue our exploration. Before we begin, however, if you are unfamiliar with me, any of my unconventional beliefs, or if at any point in time I lose you in terminology, there will be several playlists linked in the corner above, in the box down below, and along with the original source material so that you can get a better understanding of who I am and why I say the things that I do. In addition to that, if you find value, I ask that you do all of the wonderful things down below. Give me a like, a share, a follow, throw me a comment whether you agree or disagree with anything that is stated. Put it in the box down below, and if it remains respectful, it gets to remain up. If you truly find value, I ask that you hit that super thanks. Consider joining for a membership or picking up a copy of any of my books. The first one is detailing how I use the Holy Spirit and the electromagnetics of creation to heal myself. The second one is my work on alchemy, which is the completion of the Mysterium Conjunctionis by Carl Jung. And the third one is probably going to be the most relevant to today. A House Built Upon Shifting Sands is a biblical deconstruction of the Bible using the Bible as the source for deconstruction. With that being said, we are going to dive in and continue our exploration of the Archaix Chronicon. We are up to 4033 BC. Negative 138, Annus Mundi, 6138 before Armageddon, 1794 before the Flood, 1206 Anunnaki Chronology, 276 Phoenix Chronology. Once again, I will point out that other than this first number, all of the rest of these are mere speculation. Planet Phoenix enters the inner system, completing its 138-year orbit, passing through the system on its way back out to the Kuiper Belt. This was 6 years, 72 months, after the appearance of man, counting 1,656 months, 414 times 4, random numerals for whatever reason, or 138 years to man's banishment from Eden in 3895 BC. So this is 138 years prior to man's existence, right? That is what this with negative 138 Annus Mundi means. It is 138 years before humanity existed at all. And then it says that this was 6 years after the appearance of man, which is a little bit incongruous with itself. Right now, maybe we're considering Annus Mundi the expulsion from the garden, which is a thing that does not exist. It did not happen. It is not reality. And so we will see what we get going forward, because this says 6,000 years of man's banishment, and that makes me think that we're about to get into the Eden fallacy. 3895 BC, 1 Annus Mundi, 6,000 years before Armageddon, 1,656 before the Flood, 1,344 Anunnaki Chronology, 414 Phoenix Chronology, 144 Orbital Chronology. I'm just curious if this 615 is one of these significant numbers that are randomly assigned, since this is the first year of human existence, and that would be the first destruction of the earth. I wonder if maybe there is something in this number that is supposed to be significant like the rest. Now, of course, the expulsion didn't happen. Again, the House Built Upon Shifting Sands or the Unconventional Bible Study will help you to understand that. The flood as well did not happen. Many regional floods, no global flood. That is a thing that is provable, right? There is no flood sediment on any of the mountains whatsoever. None of them, not a single one of them, carries flood sediment upon them. That is a proof that this didn't happen. And there are more, there are many. In man's 144th year in the walled enclosure, paradise, a chief among the Anunnaki watchers, a seeing one, or interpreter called a serpent in Genesis, misleads mankind into doubting the word of the Eternal One. There's already a lot of problems here, right? First off, this walled enclosure is a reference to the walled enclosure of paradisio from Babylon. And so there is a chronology error, right? That the walled enclosure was not Eden, right? There's no reference whatsoever, as far as I am aware, in any of the biblical text that there was a wall around Eden, right? They were expelled from Eden. They were cast out and kept out by a flaming sword, but nothing about a wall. There is no point of reference for a wall whatsoever. There is, however, from Babylon, when the exile was over and the exiles were leaving Babylon, they were talking about the place, paradise, where they were not allowed to go in. It was a walled garden inside of Babylon. That is true, right? Now, that is true with the caveat that it is history, and there is always the possibility that people are creating history. We have an entire book about that, right? It is called the Bible. And so that is a problem already, right? Chief among the Anunnaki Watchers is saying something, right? Uh, and so this is placing the devil on a co-equal status with God, which is a problem. That is a massive fallacy. The tempter, the accuser, the whatever you want to call him, is not the co-equal of God. That is just simply not true. And if it is an incarnation inside of the creation, it also is not the equivalent of God. It is easy. If you can see it, put your hands upon it, hear it, taste it, touch it, anything, it's not God, right? It can be a representative of God. Everything in existence is a representative of God, but none of them are God in and of itself. That is easy. It is easy. If you can put your hands on it or see it, it's not God. Misleads mankind into doubting the word of the eternal one. And then you get into the whole original sin problem, right? Why did God create a tree and put it there with the knowledge, right? God is not without knowledge. That is kind of definitional. He is omniscient. He sees all of the possibilities. And there is no possibility that you place this tree in the garden with the serpent to tempt, and it does not happen exactly like that, right? And so this was not misleading mankind, but instead exposing them to exactly what was supposed to happen. It is the same problem with Judas Iscariot, right? Everybody's like, Judas was a traitor. Well, if Judas was a traitor and did exactly what he was not supposed to do, then why did Jesus tell him to go do it? Right? If he hadn't done what he did, then the New Testament couldn't have been completed. Then how is he a traitor? Right? It is a conundrum in and of itself. It is a circular reasoning problem. There was, and right, the expulsion from Eden is a speculation that has been made by someone at some point on how creation began. That's all it is, right? It is not God came down, talked to somebody face to face, and said, write these things down. This is exactly how it happened. If that was the case, we would have a much better version. It would be consistent with itself. It would not disagree with itself constantly, and it would actually give you some good guidelines. Back to the text. Humanity in Eden had been given the discretion to live free from doubt and constraints. Free from doubt and constraints, you say. But by listening to the interpreter, mankind fell under the power of those that defined for them good and evil. Okay, so this right here, you have to see the logical inconsistency in this, right? Right, you have to. If you are using the Bible as a reference, then there absolutely was a constraint placed upon Adam. Maybe not Eve, but definitely Adam, right? You shall not eat from the fruit of this tree is a constraint. Is that wrong? Is that wrong? Now, the problem is that until he ate from the tree, he didn't know that disobeying that constraint was wrong. Right? If you don't have the ability to discern the difference between sinful and not, then doing something is not sinful because you don't have the capacity to be responsible for the decision that you're making. But once you ate from the tree and you were able to make decisions, then you could disobey. Up until that point, you can't. Once mankind's eyes were opened, sinister intent of the Anunnaki, because they have the full capacity to thwart the will of God. Humanity was no longer beyond good and evil and was from that point onward a slave to their own consciousness. A slave, you say? You are a slave to doing the correct thing. Is that what you're trying to tell me? That it is a burden to do the right thing? Is that what you're trying to tell me? It is a burden not to kill someone. It is a burden not to steal from someone. It is a burden not to lie to someone. It is a burden not to commit adultery. It is a burden not to commit false witness. It is a burden. Is that what you're telling me? You were a slave to your conscience. You know you did wrong, and so you were enslaved to it. Is that what you were telling me? That is stupid. Like, that ain't even foolish. That is stupid. Right? A slave to your own consciousness. Now, his conscience, his guide, mankind is cursed to condemn himself or to correct himself as it should be. With their eyes opened, according to a Gnostic text, the first humans saw their makers. They loathed them since they were beastly forms. Once again, I will point out that the Gnostic, right, using the term Gnostic is a big, big thing, right? It's not even the same as using Christian, which is still a big, big thing, right? There are a wide variety of ways that Christianity is applied, right? You have the First Baptists who say that you are condemned to hell if you dance, and then you have the Pentecostals who pretty much think that you are if you don't. And if you're not out there shaking and jiving for the Lord, you're probably not full of the Holy Ghost, according to them. That is two discongruencies, right? Two ways of operating in the same system that are not the same at all. That is the problem with Gnosticism, right? It is a belief system that spans thousands of years, predating Christianity by a significant amount, and thousands of miles, with many wide differences in how it is applied. You had Gnostic cults that were sex cults, and they believed in having sex with anything that moved. And then you had Gnostic cults that were completely sexless and believed in not having sex with anything at all. And both of those were completely incorrect, completely enacting what they considered to be the true and faithful word of God in the wrong manner whatsoever. They have groups that we're not going to eat anything, right? We'll subsist on bread every other day. That is what one of them did. And then you got another one, the Epicureans. They believe that you could eat anything at any point, even to excess. Gluttony, no problem whatsoever. Two ways of doing the same thing. Both of those are considered Gnostic. All four of those are considered Gnostics, and they enact what they believe in completely different ways, right? Not even slightly the big congruous. And that's going to be the problem when we pull out these Gnostic texts, right? When I dismiss the Nag Hammadi and the things along that nature, it is because of that, right? We've done a few of those works, not all of them. We will probably be doing that this year. But they are incongruous with themselves. They are not really true and faithful. What they are is exactly what I told you Genesis was. People speculating about what is and writing it down. And just because it is written down does not make it correct. Right? Especially if it directly contradicts things that we know to be true or itself as a source. And that is quite often the problem. And so quoting the Gnostic text is going to be very case dependent, like extremely case dependent. They saw their makers, and this is saying here, right, which is again discongruous with the things that have been stated in this text, the Chronicon. This is saying that the Anunnaki made the humans, and again, before, what did we see? That they saw into the future that God was going to create the humans, that it was going to be from a different material, right? The Anunnaki are created from fire, human is created from clay, and these things upset them, right? They didn't make it according to this text. And then you get a little bit further along and they did. And then you get a little further along and they didn't. And then you get a little further along and they did. That is inconsistency. That is going to be a proof against validity. And if you are contradicting yourself in your explanation of your thoughts, you're probably not done thinking them. Back to the text. This supports the finding that the Anunnaki were changed by the Eternal One to mirror their original creations. What finding? Where did we get that? The the original creations, the reptiles and amphibians of the prehistoric period. The man is cursed and sent out into the earth for 6,000 years until the return of the chief cornerstone, who the builders, the Anunnaki, rejected. The 6,000 years will be reconfirmed in several astonishing ways in this research. The 6,000th year is 2106 AD, the exact year that Nibiru, the Anunnaki homeworld, will pass close to Earth on its way back out of the solar system. All right, so this is one of those. Well, that's extremely convenient. Okay, it's extremely convenient that your proof will come after pretty much everybody who is existent now is no longer. Right, even the people who are being born now will be aged by the time that this happens. I will be gone. Right, I was born in 77. By the time we get to 2077, I'm probably going to be gone. Right, I will never see 2106 and the return of the planet. Well, that's awfully convenient. Right? My proof will be proven after I'm dead. I bet it won't. I bet it won't. I mean, if there is this planet and there is this 12,000 year reset, I mean, it is entirely possible that it is 1,000 years from now, right? I fully expect it to be within my lifetime, probably within the next 40 years. That does not mean that I am planning on surviving it. I hope I do, but that doesn't mean I will. And most people will not. That is just simply the way that it works. Placing a hard date on it is going to be a problem every single time because, especially if it is like this, where there will be no validity to this, right? All of the proof texts have either passed or are too far ahead to see. And that's going to be a problem. Uh, we don't know that this will happen, and that therefore this cannot be a proof that it will happen. And we don't even have records that would be necessary to anticipate its return. And we do have some records that it may have passed through. Again, Gil Broussard is a wonderful resource for that particular line of reasoning. Uh, Not that I believe he has it entirely correct, but he has spent the time to at least establish his facts. Back to the text. Banished into the wild, mankind attempts to go back to the wild enclosure, but the appearance of a fiery flaming sword prevents this, held by an angelic guardian. I believe that this is actually a remembrance of the last fire cataclysm, right? I do believe that there was one and that it changed the topography of the earth quite significantly. I believe that it was the result of a plasmic discharge, which is like lightning, but much larger, right? Think of a lightning bolt 50, 60, 100 miles wide. That's what we're talking about. Would that resemble a flaming sword? Probably. Would it make it where you couldn't go back? Probably. And so there is an explanation that is not necessarily supernatural for this. The account has promoted much confusion. Celestial bodies like comets and unknown planets that gave off tails in the sky were referred to as swords, as seen in the scripture, in the writings of Josephus and Pliny. In this year, planet Phoenix entered the inner solar system, completing its 138-year orbit, passing through the system on its way back to the Kuiper Belt. It is the visual appearance of the planet Phoenix that signaled the start of the 6,000-year timeline and set in stone the association in antiquity between comets and celestial bodies and judgment on Earth, which will culminate until Phoenix initiates an apocalyptic event darkening the sun in 2040 AD, initiating a pole shift disaster that is referred in Revelation as the sixth seal. Another name for Phoenix was Typhon, a name preserving Phoenix as seen in Typhon. And this is bracketed for those who are watching or just listening, right? Phoenix, it has Phoen, which is fiend, in brackets, and then it had in Typhon, it has Phon in brackets, which is fawn. And those are not necessarily so dissimilar that you couldn't see some resemblance, especially if you were looking for a resemblance. Plutarch relates that Typhon was reddish, and Massey wrote that the ancients wrote a lot about a celestial body with a red tail. There were probably many of them to write about. And We do have records of astronomical events going back millennia, right? Um, it is there are recordings in South America of astronomical events. There are recordings in North America. There are recordings in the Far East, and pretty much anywhere that humans were, they were looking at the stars and recording the events that they saw. So, yes, comets and asteroids did exist. They have always existed. They would have been noticeable, right? The same way that we can notice some of them today, they could notice them then. They had the ability to recognize, right? Humans are pretty consistent throughout. We have evolved into the use of electricity, but we've always been able to think and to solve problems, right? That's how we came up with tools to begin with. Um, and so there are records of astronomical events happening. That is true, right? Now, these other things that are being extrapolated from that may or may not be true. Uh, I do not know, for instance, how accurate that Phoenix was Typhon, right? Uh, there's really not, as far as I'm aware, from my understanding of what Typhon is, right? Typhon was the disruption of the deep that caused the creation of the earth, according to the stories, right? It was the primeval waters that collected. Now, I can be wrong in that. I'm by no means an expert in Greek mythology, which is where Typhon came from, and so possibly. Uh, I don't know that identifying it with Phoenix is going to be a thing because Phoenix is supposed to be a bird which is consumed by fire and rebirths from itself. That is probably an allegory for the sun having a micronova, but again, we don't have any confirmation of that. Back to the text. The palm tree long ago was a symbol of the reckoning of time, and in Hebrew, the palm is Phoenix, with ancient roots resolving to fo in ix, or one great fire. The palm branch was a symbol for time and periodicity. An evergreen tree, you say. Harpalo wrote that it was adopted as a symbol for the month. Time was reckoned by plucking off the shoots on a palm branch. I'm assuming that there is a reference for that since there is a footnote, but it could be that it was rub mark made upon a wall, right? A line drawn in the dirt, a notch carved in a stick. Any of those things are significant to the passage of time, right? I don't know that this was necessarily the origination of time and the counting thereof, which is what is definitely being intimated from that. In Assyria, the palm tree was the tree of life, also identifiable as a flaming column, as it is found often encoiled by a serpent. There is definitely a lot of symbology of a serpent on a stick. There may be reasons for that. The palm, Phoenix, merges out of all these concepts. Phoenix is the planet of chronology. That Adam was 144 years old when banished is reflected in the Kabbalistic tradition, and is apologies. And just like the book of Jasher is an apologetic, right? The Kabbalistic tradition is definitely apologizing for things. And he is assigned the number 144. Adam in Hebrew is ADM. No, it's not. There is no A, right? The Hebrew don't use the vowels, right? They do not write down vowels. A is a value. The A has a value of 1, the D is 4, and the M is 40. But 0 has no value, right? Remember when I told you the gematria is useless? Case in point. The sum of ADM is thus 144 or 8. And no, I'm not by any means a Hebrew scholar. I don't know most of the words. Jason is much better than that than I am. And I'm not talking about Jason Brashears. I'm talking about Jason Ayers, uh, Green Country Agroforestry. Well, we've done several live streams with him discussing the Hebrew alphabet because he is much better versed in it than I am. And he doesn't claim to be an expert, but he is at least studying it. I'm not. I don't have I don't give the value to it to place my time to learn it. But one thing that I do know is that any time that is written, even today, they don't use the vowels. I mean, it isn't completely up to you already needing to know what they should be for it to happen. And so if they're doing the gematria of it written, there's not going to be an A. It's just not. It's going to be 4 and 4, which is 8 anyway. I mean, um, so back to the text. In Old Assyrian and Akkadian tablets, the word Adam is found used as a proper name. The curse humanity suffers is elaborated on by the prophet Ezekiel, who wrote that the 4 judgments God employs against mankind to curb sin and rebellion throughout world history are sword, famine, plague, and wild beast. These are all things that do happen. But to say that God is the reason, I mean, yes, right? Everything according to the plan. I do believe that. But it's not necessarily because of sin and rebellion. I mean, there are many factors that go into those things. That's like the entire misunderstanding of Sodom and Gomorrah, right? What was the main problem with Sodom and Gomorrah? It was not homosexuality. I know that steps on toes, but they had been doing that for a while, right? There wasn't a problem with it up until they began forcing it on people despite their objections to it. That is what the text says. And so there are misinterpretations even about what sin is. Right? According to the Bible, picking up sticks on the wrong day is a sin. You should be beat in the head with a stone until you quit breathing because you needed to keep warm or to cook some food. That is a thing. Right? There are many, many moral problems with the law of Moses. And so, do they get the sword, famine, plague, and wild beasts for beating people in the head with stones until they quit picking up sticks? Do they get that, or is that considered good? Is it considered good to beat people's brains out because you don't like them picking up sticks on the wrong day? Yeah, yeah. Okay, so there's definitely some problems there, right? This year begins a 1948-year countdown to the birth of Abraham, who will father many nations. Yeah, he didn't exist either. This 1904, and if he did, he was absolutely the wrong person for God to choose. This 1947 BC birth counts another 1948 years to 1 AD, the start of a whole different calendrical system. In the 1948th year of this new Anno Domini calendar, the nation of Israel will be reestablished. Additionally, this is the 1344th Anunnaki chronology, and 1,344, a product of 792 and 552. Okay. Nibiru's orbit is 792 years, and Phoenix cycles dreaded in antiquity were 552 years, or 4 orbits of 138 years each. I am trying to save my main disagreements with these numbers to the point where they actually get shown where they come from, right? We have not had any verifiable, confirmable evidence that these numbers bear any significance whatsoever other than that they add up to what you want them to add up. Right? We're not getting proof that this is the year that this came in and this is the event that happened whenever this came in, right? The Phoenix came in on a 552-year cycle, and the entirety of the country of Lithuania was destroyed, right? That would be a significant event, right? Not a regional conflict, not a minor drought, not dust storms caused by human intervention. I mean, these things don't count, right? It would have to be something of a significant nature of a divine appointment. And we just don't have that evidence. We haven't had it yet. It may be coming, right? I'm holding out hope that he will actually furnish some evidence for these numbers. But other than that, they add up to what I want them to add up, I don't see that, right? The 6,000 beginning point is an arbitrary number with no real validity whatsoever. And so, basing your counting system off of that, you got to have a reason to. In the year 1860, A.D.W. Morgan calculated the Druid processional system, which began when the equinox occurred in the first part of Taurus, his calculation being 3903 BC. Well, there is a significant problem with that. What is that? The only records that we have of anything relating to the Druids was written by people who were trying to eradicate the Druids. And while that is not necessarily disqualifying for information being relayed, if they're telling you that they hate people because they hate them and they want to eradicate them, it may not be actual, right? It may not be a factual situation that they actually did the things that are attributed to them. That is one of the problems with history, right? Who writes the history? The people who win. And if the people who win don't like the people who lose, they can make up whatever they want about the people who lose. We do not have a single existent, as far as I am aware, physical record of any nature from the Druids themselves. Not a one. And that is a significant problem for any understanding of what they believed. The only references that we have to anything that they believed came from the people who were trying to eradicate them and is definitely filled with hyperbole. Back to the text. This is an amazing feat. In over 57 and a half centuries, Morgan was only 8 years off. After extensive research of the biblical records, the book of Jasher, and the book of apologetics and Assyrian eponyms, chronologist Stephen Jones and his Secrets of Time, published that this year, 3895 BC, was year one, so highly regarded by the ancient world. This 6,000 year timeline had nothing to do with the creation. I agree. But it is a fixed astronomical chronology that began with the appearance of planet Phoenix in 3895 BC, the first time humans witnessed it, and ends in 2106 AD when planet Nibiru exits the solar system. The geometrical framework of world history unfolds within the parameters of the visitations of these two intruder planets. All right, now, finally, we are getting to the point where we're going to be able to get to actual chronology when people were here, right? Up until this point, the first 8 pages is saying that there were no humans, kind of. I mean, it is conflicting on that. We have humans, we don't have humans. God creates them, the Anunnaki creates them. It's quite contradictory within itself. We'll see how it shakes out. All right, we got time. Footnotes: 1. Flying serpents and dragons, 23. 2. Josephus, Jewish War on 70 AD, 653. Pliny, 2, 22, 89. First Chronicles, 21, 16. Revelation, 1, 16. 3. Gerald Massey Lectures, 148. 4. Lost Language of Symbolism, 2, page 162. 5. Gerald Massey Lectures, 183. 6. Lost Language of Symbolism, 2, page 276. 7. The Knights Templar in the New World, 125. 8. The Rosicrucian Cosmo Conception, 500. 9. Sargon the Magnificent, 121, note 1. 10. Ezekiel 14, 21 to 23. And 11. St. Paul in Britain, 12. 3880 BC, 15 Annus Mundi, 5985 before Armageddon, 1641 before the Flood, 1359 Anunnaki Chronology, 429 Phoenix Chronology, 159 Orbital Chronology. According to the ancient book of Jasher, the book of apologetics, that book has zero validity. We're going to do that after this, right? We're going to do the origin of the world is the next one, and then we're going to do the book of Jasher following that. And we will completely crush that. In the ancient book of Jasher, Cain and Abel were twins. Cain slaying Abel when they were 15 years of age. This story immortalized the worldwide legends of the twins always at war with another. By this time, Keva, Eve, had 2 or 3 more children, daughters. Abel was the firstborn and first murdered human, foreshadowing the atonement of the Messiah in the person of the Christ, also called Shiloh. This was 3,880 years to the start of the Anno Domini calendar, year of the Lord, and the grammatical value for Shiloh is 3,880. All right, well, there are many problems here, right? First off, we'll get to this, right? You may not agree with the canonical understanding of the Bible, right? But At least the Old Testament is based upon something else. And yes, there are books that have been pulled out, right? I believe that the Jews still have the book of Jubilee. They don't have the book of Jasher. Right? Now, there are several different volumes that purport to be the book of Jasher. Some of them are more easily dismissible than others, but the primary one appears to be apologetics. It contains things that are unknowable in the time that it would have had to have been written in order for it to be accurate. We will discuss that in a lot more detail as we go along or as we get into Jasher. But one of the problems that is going to be quite evident as we get into Jasher is that it contains inconsistencies with the original narrative, right? The original narrative does not have Cain and Abel as twins. They might have been, but it was not designated. Every other case of twins that is recorded throughout the rest of the history that is recorded in that book, history is a is a generous appellation, uh, marks the twins quite significantly. Right, that is definitely a motif that is repeated throughout that, and there is no reason to expect that if it was accurate that Cain and Abel were actually twins, that would not have been contained in the book of Genesis. I mean, there is no reason to believe that that particular piece of information would have been restricted to another volume. Some of the other things, maybe, right? But that particular piece of information would be vitally important as you get into the Jacob Esau, right? As you get into this repeat of the pattern that is established, it would be vitally important for them to lay out that this particular thing was significant in that way, that it is setting the beginning point for that pattern that does repeat. That's a problem, right? But in addition to that, there's a lot of inconsistency problems and problems in general with that right now. If you believe that the canonical Bible is true and accurate, when Noah got out of the flood, he made an altar, he placed a sacrifice upon it, and the angel of the Lord came down and says, "You have done well. Go forth, be fruitful and multiply, replenish the earth and be stewards thereof, shed no blood of man. And oh, by the way, you can now eat meat." That is what it is said, right? That is what is said in Genesis to Noah after the flood. Now you can eat meat. Well, that provides a severe problem for anyone eating meat prior to Noah, right? And so you got problems with that sacrifice that happened between Cain and Abel. Right? One of them was a tiller of the earth, as was instructed. They were given a vegetarian diet. So one of them was acting in accordance with God's will, and the other one was a herdsman with no real reason to be so. They were not given leave to eat meat. They were given a vegetarian diet. They were not given leave to eat meat until after the flood. So why was he a herdsman? Why was he keeping herds? He wasn't. That is a retrospection or a retrogression into, right? They are inserting an understanding into a story without the understanding that they are directly contradicting the same story in the same book, right? That is a significant problem that cannot be explained. It simply can't, right? One of them was doing exactly what God said, and his sacrifice was not accepted. The other one committed the first murder upon the earth and then gave that sacrifice, and it was accepted. And then the guy who wasn't accepted committed the second murder. Big problems, big consistency problems. And again, that's not getting into all of them, right? So, um, Abel was the firstborn and first murdered human, foreshadowing the atonement of the Messiah in the person of Christ. That is another problem because there was no need for that atonement. One of the things that is quite clear if you actually read through that book is that the blood was a pocket hit, right? If you committed a sin and you had to give a sacrifice and atonement for that sin, it was not because the blood forgave you. It was a hit in your pocketbook. That goat that you had to sacrifice, you were planning on eating that or selling it. And either way, it was a very tangible reinforcement that, hey, I messed up and now I need to correct my actions. It was never because the blood actually forgave you for anything. There was no point in time where killing a goat, a pigeon, or a cow forgave you from anything. Then it states that in the book repeatedly, right? Often, again, fall back. I have the references. And so almost every single book in the Old Testament tells you that the blood sacrifice is not necessary. And then there's the whole problem of propitiatory sacrifice in the New Testament. And so it wasn't enough that we were killing cows. Now we got to kill a human. Wild. Where are we at? All right, we can do a couple more, I think. All right, 3765 BC, 130 Annus Mundi, 5870 before Armageddon, 1526 before the flood, 1474 Anunnaki chronology, 544 Phoenix chronology, 274 orbital chronology. As humankind rapidly multiplies, Seth is born, chosen by God to carry on the Masonic bloodline and be the future patriarch of the Sethites, who construct the Great Pyramid complex at Akuzan, Giza. Adam and Eve had many other children. Seth built the pyramid. Got you. Right now, there is a definite correlation between Seth and Set. Right? There is many good reasons to make those correlations, and that is because Seth was taken from the Egyptian understandings. That is where most of this came from, right? Like most of the understandings are either taken from the Babylonians directly or taken from the Egyptians directly. Set is one of those things. Footnote 1. Antiquity of the Jews. 2. 368. 3757 BC, 138 Annus Mundi, 5862 before Armageddon, 1518 before the flood, 1482 Anunnaki chronology, 552 Phoenix chronology, 282 orbital chronology. Planet Phoenix passes through the inner solar system on its 138-year orbit of the sun on its way back to the Kuiper Belt. Is there verification for that at all? Probably not. 3725 BC, 170 Annus Mundi, 5830 before Armageddon, 1486 before the flood, 1514 Anunnaki chronology, 584 Phoenix chronology, and 314 orbital chronology. At 40 years old, Seth begins ruling over the Adamites, establishing a kingdom. Really? Is that what happened? The early Egyptians venerated him as Set, and only late in Egyptian antiquity, as newer gods came into vogue, was Seth, demonized, falling into disrepute. The Sethite kingdom and center of pre flood civilization was in Egypt. Well, that is a massive cultural appropriation. Right? Like I just said, there is a definite reason that the correlations are made between the two, and that is because the Hebrews stole it, not the Egyptians. This is wild to me. Right? Wild. 3671 BC, 224 Annus Mundi, 5776 before Armageddon, 1432 before Flood, 1568 Anunnaki chronology, 638 Phoenix chronology, 368 orbital chronology, and 1 Jewish calendar. The Jewish calendar begins from the years that have passed since the counting of years began. This was the 54th year of the reign of Seth. This calculation would be the result of rabbinical error, or Seth could have instituted a calendar in his 54th year. There is calendrical evidence that this begin date for a timeline was intentional. 1. Flying Serpents and Dragons 103. And if it was intentional, it was probably because it is almost a certainty that the first 5 books of the Bible, Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy, were all created post exile. That would be why it was intentional. They were retrograding a belief system onto a people who were already existent in the land. 3619 BC to 76 Annus Mundi, 5,724 years before Armageddon, 1,380 before the flood, 1,620 Anunnaki chronology, 690 Phoenix chronology, 420 orbital chronology, 52 in the Jewish calendar. Planet Phoenix passes through the inner solar system on its 138-year orbit on its way back out to the Kuiper Belt. 3615 BC, 280 Annus Mundi, 5720 before Armageddon, 1376 before the flood, 1624 Anunnaki chronology, 694 Phoenix chronology, 424 orbital chronology, and 56 Jewish calendar. Mankind begins falling away from the teaching of Seth and Adam, beginning to worship the creation rather than the creator. This completes 7 generations, a generation being 40 years. Prior to this time, there was virtually no strife or crime, and this period is remembered in the Japanese Way of the Gods traditions. The account is recorded by Josephus in Antiquities. We have not read through Josephus or Antiquities. We will probably wind up having to do that at some point, but this is what I prove to me that there was no strife or crime. I mean, I'm going to have to see the actual records, and it may be that it is included in Josephus, but oddly enough, there is no footnote pointing that out here. Okay. 3530 BC, 365 Annus Mundi, 5635 before Armageddon, 1291 before the flood, 1709 Anunnaki chronology, 779 Phoenix chronology, 509 orbital chronology. Cainan, son of Enosh, begins ruling the Adamites at age 40, ending Seth's reign of 195 years. Cainan is wise and knowledgeable, famous for his power over spirits and demons. He was troubled by premonitions of a future disaster, the drowning of an entire world. Boy, here we go, huh? This is from Jasher 211. That is the footnote. And we'll probably wind up wrapping up here. Okay, so this is inconsistent, right? And by inconsistent, I mean with the source material. Right? First off, I am unaware. It's probably in Jasher, but Jasher is a creation much, much later in time. I am unaware of anyone before Solomon being attributed with the power over the spirits and demons, especially in the pre-exilic times, right? Or even the pre-slavery times. This is before Abraham and before any of that. So, well, maybe not Abraham, right? Anyway, there is, as far as I'm aware, nothing that is going to state this that has any validity whatsoever. Again, I can be wrong, but Jasher is an apologetic book. It is not of accurate history. We will get to that. But the problem here, right, the major problem here, he was troubled by premonitions of a future disaster, the drowning of the entire world. That is directly contradictory. Right? The only one that was warned, according to the original canon, was Noah by himself. Right? He asked his people, and all of them dismissed it about the flood. If there was a record of Cainan who had this premonition about a future disaster, which troubled him, then it was probable that that would have been passed on in the oral histories and that they would have been looking for the flood. And then when somebody received the knowledge that the flood was coming, then they would have grouped together to build the boat. That is not what happened. Not according to the text. According to the text, it was the one guy by himself with the assistance of angels who came and built the boat. That is completely different than this, right? This is saying that there was a premonition of it happening well prior to Noah, and that is simply inconsistent with the original source material in its entirety. Um, we're getting close to an hour, so we're going to go ahead and wrap this one up. Hopefully, I brought a little bit of enlightenment and not too much confusion to a series of somewhat difficult topics. I understand that I hold some unconventional beliefs, and I do have a tendency to step on toes when I relay those. It is not intentional, but it is not something that I apologize for. I feel like I've explained my positions on these things well enough, if not here today, then in the other videos in this particular series. All of the points that I have pointed out, we have pointed out several times already with the explanations, right? The numbers may have value. I just don't know what it is. I have given no reason to believe that they have value whatsoever. We haven't even been given observations of the return or the leaving of this planet, right? Simply the calculation of it because you believe that that's what it had to be. That is not witnessing. That is not a record being given of this thing that happened. We have records of the stars. They predate 6,000 years ago. That is a problem with the chronology. And that is where we're going to leave it. If you like what I'm doing over here, let me know down below. Give me a like, a share, a follow, throw me a comment. Whether you agree or disagree with anything that is stated, put it in the box down below. And if it remains respectful, it gets to remain up. If you have found value, I ask that you do all of the wonderful things like, share, follow. If you truly find value, give me a super thanks. Consider joining for a membership or picking up a copy of any of the 3 books. In addition to that, if you want to reach out to me, there are links provided down below so you can get in contact with me directly. To the crew, thanks for hanging out. I appreciate every single minute that you are here with me, and I am praying for you every single day. Until next time, I love you. God loves you. You are perfect, whole, and complete just the way that you are. And this has been pittstake. Peace.